Glad I get to do a session here after a coffee break. People are up, they're ready to listen. So as Hilton described, I do want to talk about the idea of migrating over to LeanIX. As I said, as kind of the intro was pointing out, you may be coming to LeanIX from a wide array of previous situations, anything from just Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints, Visio diagrams, all the way to you've already had an established enterprise architecture management tool, and you want to go in a different direction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those considerations, but really through that talk about just in general how you can use the migration process as kind of a catalyst for positive change for your enterprise architecture practice. So I always like to start these conversations where taking a step back and understanding why you chose LeanIX, right? What are the features? What were the reasons why you chose LeanIX over no tool or any other tool? So by doing that, really allows you to start to prioritize and plan, how you would migrate, how you want to implement that product, because you really want to orient it, towards those goals. And I don't need to go down each of the unique features that LeanIX has over other tools or no tools. And I mean, after earlier this morning, hearing some of the other additional features, I could just keep adding on to this list. But it's very important to understand why you're going there. And it's just from the perspective of engaging current users or engaging stakeholders that were previously disenfranchised with the previous process. And again, these migration activities really should really target to leverage these features. So where are you coming from? And so I really bucketed this down into really two main categories. One, you've got no current enterprise architecture application, right? You've got decentralized sources out there. You've got Excel spreadsheets. You've got PowerPoint, Word, Visio. I included SharePoint into that. SharePoint was one of those funny ones. I could have put it in one or the other, depending on how built up you made that SharePoint site. But you're usually coming from this area over to LeanIX because you want to have a more structured approach to how you're capturing enterprise architecture data. So you don't want it to be in multiple different sources across your IT landscape. You want it in a consistent format. And you want the assurance, because LeanIX provides you a source where it's a centralized source of data that everyone can access in real time, that you're assured that the data that you're seeing is accurate and up to date and everyone has the same view. Where if you've got a PowerPoint out here, you've got a Visio out here, you've got an Excel, I mean, the question I always ask is this the most up-to-date one? Which version is this? You don't have to worry about that when you're working with a tool like LeanIX. So that's a big one. And even kind of bucketed in with that, especially when you have no previous enterprise architecture, management application, is that idea of just simply setting the standard on what is an application, what is an IT component, how do you want to depict your business capabilities. Those are large conversations you have down the road as you're rolling out, as you're implementing. But it's good to understand right at the beginning, what are those fact sheets types that you want to set the standard for, that you want to implement going forward. Obviously, moving from no system to LeanIX, a big driver is going to be the data visualization and reporting off of it. It's not pivot chart tables anymore. It's not building diagrams in Visio or PowerPoint. It's being data driven. The visualizations are being driven by the data within LeanIX. And then obviously, kind of what I was talking about before, the risk that the data is going to be inaccurate and out of date, lacking a clear solution or process to remedy it. And so that last line there, that process and remedy it, is a big point for me, right? It's great that we can have a centralized place to capture and organize that data, but having an application like LeanIX 2 to help drive the data quality and making sure that the data is as up to date as it needs to be, through the data quality seals, through the subscriptions that you can associate, to the different fact sheets in LeanIX. you can use the tool to help drive better data quality. Just something that was a bit tougher to do when you don't have an existing tool. And on the other side, you could be coming. And now I just realized I got a little pointer, so that's nice. You are coming from other enterprise architecture management applications, and within this section, this can be anything from a homegrown application that you built, right? It's an access database with a UI on top of it, or it's an existing, large player in the enterprise architecture management space. And many people go from those over to LeanIX because, for lack of a better word, they're kind of burned out or disenfranchised with their current solution. They don't feel like it's driving positive change within their organization. It's not right-sized. It's just not focused enough, because I think we see with a few other tools that they build more features on top of it, and it loses the focus of why we got the product to begin with, right? Enterprise architecture management. You want to leverage kind of the more modern features that LeanIX provides. As I always kind of describe LeanIX, it feels different. It feels much more different than many of the other tools out there. Just feels more modern. And actually, one of the things I pointed out here, which I see in cases where we go from other tools to LeanIX, is the desire to include more users to go into the product. So because the license structure is not restricted by the amount of users in the system, and you just you allow all users to go in right from the beginning, you're encouraging that collaboration. Where with other products, you encourage the collaboration up to a point, because then it's like, well, now it's an additional invest. Now I got to throw more licenses on top of that. So that's something you don't need to worry about. And from my kind of where I see this a lot, so actually where a lot of previous work I had done, configuration and reporting can be difficult to manage. So the reporting framework that LeanIX has, and the fact that it leverages tags, it leverages the relationships, and the reports are very easy to adapt to those. So you can you can color code those easily. You can filter out the reports right away. I don't need to do any additional configuration when I add a new tag, or I start to use existing relationships, and they're just built right into the reporting. It allows you to get to value quicker because you're not fighting the tool. The tool is adapting with what you want to do. And generally, it's a perception. The current application, it's just got a bad reputation in the organization. So just really looking to change it up, change the perception. And the point I want to make here is, no matter where you're coming from, no matter where no matter whether it's no tool or a homegrown tool or another third-party product, the migration process is in terms of the general principles around it are going to be similar. Obviously, when you get down to the details on how you're going to assess the objects and how exactly you're going to move over, it'll be a little different. But the general process around it is going to be the same. And so the point I want to make here, migration can be tough, but you want to try and frame migration to be a value-add activity. It will give you, it provides you an opportunity to review your enterprise architecture management processes, and just kind of, and how that can enhance your enterprise architecture management practice. It's important to note it should not exist on an island. It needs to be, implemented with, the proper roles and processes around it. And I say this all the time. It's the migration process. This would be a 5-minute conversation. Well, just take a spreadsheet, lift and shift, drop it in, and call it a day. That's not going to work. It may work for a couple weeks because it's a shiny new toy. We got data in it, but you really need to have the proper roles and processes around to ensure that the right people are engaged. The right data is being put in at the right time. So the migration can be a value-add activity for the sense that you can learn from your previous mistakes. Right, so what worked, what didn't work before. It's an opportunity to engage and energize important stakeholders. Maybe they were disenfranchised before with the old way that you were doing things, but you can use this migration activity to say, hey, we've got this new product here. We want to get you involved. Look at how easy you can get some of the reporting out of it. Really start to engage them again. Using the product to improve current processes, right? With the improved engagement, with the license model bringing in additional users, or adding in automation through any kind of integrations or anything that you want to do. With kind of the webhooks, the REST API within LeanIX, it does allow you to do a bit more with the integrations. Obviously, through this, you want to comprehensively review the features, identify how you implement them, and obviously, probably hear in many of the conversations today, break down any silos and how data is collected. So, you want to make sure that through the process, the data that we're gathering, the data that we want to put into the tool, is comprehensive throughout the entire organization. And obviously, this is a greater risk if things are just being tracked in spreadsheets or just in PowerPoints or Visios. That certain teams, certain business units have their ways of collecting data, and so we want to break down those walls and come to a common understanding, which we can bring into a single source of truth. And this can even be the case too for organizations that have existing products, existing enterprise architecture management tools that they're using. Especially those that, kind of I was mentioning before, were previously disenfranchised. They find the tool to be a hassle. They just will avoid using it. They'll maintain their own spreadsheet on the side, or they'll spin up their own homegrown application on the side and do their own thing. So we want to make sure that we can break down those walls and bring everything together. And another point here, because I've seen some organizations go down this path, is you want to treat your adoption, your implementation of LeanIX the same as you would for any other application that you would deploy into your IT infrastructure, your IT landscape, right? So you don't want to, and I try to make a point to call products like LeanIX an application and not a tool, because I feel like the implication of calling it a tool just means like, oh, it's kind of this one thing off to the side, we'll do some care and feeding, get it working, but not really give it kind of the thought and kind of the due diligence that we need to make sure that it's properly integrated within our organization. So I try to use the term application when I talk about products like LeanIX, to really elevate it up to, it's an important management tool for IT to be able to manage themselves. So, the way that, again, I like to break down this conversation, data, interactions, and integrated process. So you first want to look at the data, right? Review the data that you want to put into LeanIX. Where is the data? How is the data structured? Is the data comprehensive across the entire organization, or is it siloed? And who is managing the data, and is it providing any value? Now, that'll be an interesting one when we get to that, because I've got some extreme examples of data that was being collected and asking interesting questions and getting interesting answers, or lack of answers in some cases. And really through this, through this activity, as we'll talk about, you'll engage the stakeholders, the key people who will not only be entering the data, but who will be consuming the data. And you want to understand their interactions with the product as well. So who's going to maintain the data? Who's going to use the data? Is your data going to be shared with other applications? Just a very fancy way of saying, are we looking to integrate this with any of our other IT management applications? And what data is managed or sourced from other applications? So we may be sending data out to to other applications, or we may be receiving applications back. I mean, I think of kind of the classic ServiceNow example where we on LeanIX can send application information down there and receive back kind of IT component information back from them. And then at the end of the day, having that understanding of the data, the interactions, getting a sense for the process, really identify opportunities to implement LeanIX within your day-to-day current EA processes. And this is a big one for me in terms of you don't want through your migration process to then have LeanIX just be kind of an afterthought. So you do the work and like, oh yeah, I got to go fill that out, or the application actually gets into production, gets implemented, is actually supporting the business now, and someone weeks later asks, where's that application that was just implemented? Is that in LeanIX? And you kind of scramble to put it back in. You want it to be integrated in the process so that as things are happening in IT, that it's being reflected. So it's not just something that you're continually catching up. And the thing that I always say for this, because again we may be working with people who may have a somewhat negative connotation of EA and enterprise architecture management tools, is at first you do no harm. So making sure that if people are doing are able to do certain functions today, whether it's in spreadsheets or whether it's in existing tools, that we still give them the ability to still do what they need to do and potentially enhance that. So we don't necessarily want to add additional work for people. We don't want to slow down their day-to-day job. We want to make sure that we improve their day-to-day. So this is kind of a busy slide, so I'll kind of talk kind of a little bit to this, but this slide's really just kind of encompassing kind of my free thoughts around how to review the data. And this comes from both perspectives on if it's decentralized documents or you're coming from an existing tool. And this may sound somewhat tedious, or it may sound a little bit overblown, but I found this to be very helpful in kind of early adoption and getting people excited and have everyone marching kind of to the beat of the same drum here. Is review your existing data that you have with key stakeholders. You want to have a representative from each area that you expect to either enter data or to consume data from LeanIX, and actually walk through, not necessarily row by row, like say every application that you have, but really column by column, thinking about it from a spreadsheet perspective, each piece of data that you're collecting on an application, or each piece of data that you're collecting on a component. And really ask the question, is this data that we still need? Because data, what I've seen, and I've actually have a past customer that I've worked with within the past year, with on an application, and I don't think I'm exaggerating here. I think it was 78 different pieces, 78 different attributes they're collecting on an application, and it was we split that review off into 2 or 3 different sessions, but it was a very eye-opening activity to do that, because what ends up happening is you see fields and you ask, hey, is this still used? And they'll say, well, that was something that that CIO 3 years ago, he needed to understand our portfolio in this perspective, and it really hasn't been updated in like a year. And so the way that I would approach that is say, let's not have that excess baggage when we migrate over. Right, we can keep an old copy of it somewhere if someone, for whatever reason, asks for it again. But really, I'm really looking for you to remove the noise when it comes to reviewing, reviewing the data. So you want to look for, kind of data that, attributes that you're just no longer using anymore. Right, they were maybe tactical in nature. They were needed to satisfy an immediate need, but not necessarily anything that's used anymore. Another important point too is to look at the data that you're capturing, and this is especially the case for, say, like Excel spreadsheets and the PowerPoint and the Visio, and say, is that actually an attribute that should be on that object, or is it a relationship that we can use that we can leverage within LeanIX? And that's why it's important in these conversations to have it be led by someone who's not only familiar just generally with the data, but also be led by someone who's familiar with how LeanIX works. You want someone who knows the relationships between fact sheets, how tags work, how subscriptions work, so that as we're going through this session, they can call out, okay, well, we have this free text field called capabilities supported. Is that something that we can then maybe, instead of having it be a field, have that be a relation between applications and business capability in LeanIX? And so I see that a lot. I see free-form text list of technologies, right? So that can be a relation between application and IT component. But it's important that that session is led by someone who has an understanding not only of the data of the organization, but how LeanIX works. And through these sessions, it's also good to identify who's going to be the source of record, whether it's a specific user type, whether it's another application. It's important to get that tied down, because that is really going to drive the later conversations in terms of are there integrations we can leverage? How are we going to engage the users? And so it sets us up to start to define the new process around it. In these sessions, in those that I've run, they almost become like a appetizer for the training sessions or additional engagement that we're going to do later on. People start to get a bit familiar about what LeanIX is about, how everything's going to work. So it's kind of a nice precursor to kind of your kind of later on migration, training, onboarding activities that you're going to do. And then kind of the other point too, like if you are coming from an existing enterprise architecture management tool, you almost need I hesitate to put kind of like a Rosetta Stone picture on here, but you're going to need again someone who's familiar with the old tool in LeanIX that and with LeanIX and understand that X in enterprise architecture management system A equals Y in LeanIX, and make sure that you have the proper connections between those two. And then actually the other point here too, which I forgot to mention, much I was talking about, look at the freeform data, see what could be relationships. Another thing to look at too, especially if you really want to leverage the reporting capabilities and now some of the capabilities within the visualizer, any kind of free text fields that could actually be enumerated fields, right? So those that have a finite amount of values, right? A particular field may have 4 or 5 finite values. Probably a good idea to start them out as tags in LeanIX, just because it leverages the reports well, it leverages the visualizers very well. And you really want to leave these reviews, with an agreement on what data you're looking to bring forward, who's going to ultimately own the data, and where the data is going to be coming from. If it's going to be coming from another source. And so this is just kind of a quick example I threw up here. Kind of the things I was talking about, right? There's obviously some key candidates here, leveraging existing fields in LeanIX. We've got start date, we've got end date, we got the application name, we got the description. The capabilities supported here, right? This is just a comma separated freeform text. Probably best to leverage that as a relationship between application and business capability. The freeform technology fields, probably best to map those applications to IT components. Someone that we may call like an application owner leverages as like a subscription. Something like a business fit here. I know that that we got kind of the business fit kind of 4-star field. In LeanIX, so almost kind of doing a conversion like, all right, if I put good here, does that mean 2 stars, 3 stars? So coming up with a standard on what the business fit will mean, and then kind of this example of cloud readiness, where, and again, it's nice to kind of put this in a tag because this cloud readiness could be something that I was describing before is kind of like a tactical thing that we're kind of slicing and dicing our application portfolio on for this moment, right? In 10, 15 years, we may not be talking about cloud readiness. Who knows what we'd be talking about? But with the cloud readiness, there's not an existing field, but would probably be best used as a tag so that we can easily bring it in, we can easily take it out, and we can easily apply it to the different reporting and views. So when we talk about kind of the migration process, again, you can't just talk about data in a vacuum. Data, people interact with data. Systems interact with data. So we've got the systems interactions. So it's from that within the migration process, it's important to understand first in any existing solution that you have, are there any existing integrations in place that we just need to know of? And you might think, well, of course I'll know that, but you'd be surprised in some cases, especially if in a previous solution you publish out an API and people just subscribe to it and you don't necessarily track who's using it. You get some interesting responses back when you actually start to engage and have these meetings. But I even take note here, like yes, even think about kind of the data connections that you kind of make within Excel. So any kind of external sources that you're pulling from, it's just good to have an understanding of that and understand kind of what's relevant to move forward, what's fine to leave behind because maybe LeanIX fills a gap that the previous solution could not. So again, that's what I was saying, kind of based on the previous conversations, review the integration, see what's possible. And then the thing about, kind of with system integrations, it's also important to understand the triggers of when to when to fire off those integrations. So you want to understand a condition on, say, for example, when you want to send an application definition down to ServiceNow. Maybe you don't want to send it down to ServiceNow right away. Maybe you want to wait till it's in, say, kind of like a phase-in or active period before you send that down. So it's important to understand with the system interactions when you want to interact with those other systems. And then with user interactions, understanding key user types. Kind of you want to almost kind of stereotype or group together your key user types and how you see them interacting with the product, both from data entry and data consumption standpoint. And how do you want to engage user types through subscriptions, through any kind of notifications, surveys? Think about what that process is going to be. And always kind of have an eye towards how their day-to-day function may be changed, enhanced as a part of this migration. Again, we are going to a new product, a new tool, new application. And you want to understand, how that will, how we can make their day-to-day better. And then so, again, I kind of went through the system integrations part here. Again, make sure you adhere to the sources of truth and the conditions that apply for when you want to use the integrations. But again, I think the opportunities here I've talked about before. Excuse me. It allows you to embed your integration, embed this, that application to your day-to-day process. Obviously, with good integrations, you can decrease the overall workload, enhance your data quality, and provide insights into the data that are not necessarily possible because we never actually put that data together before. And user interactions, I've talked about how you need to consider. And I just kind of put a, kind of a basic way that I like to think about users at a start. I usually do this for like step one, and then we will further break it down based on any organizational needs. So you got your super users. Those will probably be your enterprise architects. So they'll have kind of full reign. They know exactly how to use the tool. You got your day-to-day users. So these are people who your goal for them, especially if they're entering data, you want them to get in and out of the data as fast as possible and as painlessly as possible. They may come back in to view specific data, specific fact sheets, but your success for them is if they don't complain that they have to use the application. You've got your viewers. These could be especially with LeanIX, could be anybody in the organization, right? They want to look at data aggregated at a high level, or they want to look at data from an individual fact sheet perspective. And I separate viewers out from executive viewers because executive viewers, they're also a type of viewer where they don't necessarily want to be in very long to find out what they need to find out. They're going to be more interested in the aggregation of the data to get the penetrating insights, not necessarily look at an individual fact sheet or an individual kind of field. Like they just want to get a sense of the overall kind of the overall landscape of things, right away and get the insights that they need and get out and go on with their day because they just don't have the time to dilly-dally. So when it comes to understanding the user interactions, I like to break them down by this, and then if we have different types of day-to-day users, that's when you can kind of further break that down. But understanding that will then get you to then understand, well, how can we integrate this into kind of how they will kind of perform their day-to-day. And so I just kind of, very, very basic example, and you want to think about these. You can almost kind of lay these out for like different use cases that people are going to have on this. But this, this kind of simple one I put together is kind of implementing a new application as part of a project. Kind of off to the side, you got your business partners, defining your business capabilities, and then a project is starting up. You're going to have your enterprise architect, let's say for this example, put in that planned project that's going to happen into LeanIX, and then you can actually through any kind of integration. I just kind of put CA Technologies here, but sending the project definition down, just kind of like a shell of a project to Clarity, which then can be kind of further fleshed out and update statuses and kind of the more project managey type functions. kind of being done, within Clarity, and then, any kind of status, kind of indicators or anything that we want to send from Clarity back into LeanIX, just to give that kind of 10,000-foot view of, okay, like how are all my applications doing, how are we running? So getting that set up there. Obviously, with a project, we can associate them to applications in LeanIX. Associate application and business capability, application IT component. And then, again, once you, send that, once the application's in a, depending on what trigger you have, sending that application definition down to ServiceNow, which then you can start to associate, assets and tickets and everything that you need for that. But really the point of this is to show, again, when you're doing your migration, don't think of LeanIX on an island. It's part of a whole greater IT management ecosystem that you need to really keep in mind. And if you want this migration to last and be successful longer than, say, the initial first couple months that you rolled it out, you really need to think about this case. And I kind of always call this, I always kind of jokingly describe it as nirvana, when you can tie together and have a view of technology architecture, application architecture, business architecture, and project management, and you can actually see that all in one integrated place. There's a reason why I call it nirvana, because it's hard to get there. It is a journey, but it is something that is possible if you, again, take it seriously from the beginning, right when you start your migration. And with that said,